Hollywood has been celebrating the wrong 1940s movies for decades. Everyone remembers Casablanca, Citizen Kane, and The Maltese Falcon, but some equally brilliant films were pushed into the shadows. These were not worthless leftovers. They were daring thrillers, strange fantasies, emotional dramas, and beautifully photographed experiments that simply lost the popularity contest. Before we begin, hit like, share this video with another classic movie fan, and subscribe to the channel. Number 18, The Great McGinty, 1940. Politics being dishonest is hardly a new idea, but Preston Sturges was already laughing at the machinery behind elections in 1940. The film follows Dan McGinty, a broke drifter who discovers that a political machine is paying people to cast fraudulent votes under different names. Most men would take the money once and disappear. McGinty notices something better. Nobody seems to be checking very carefully. He moves from polling place to polling place, votes again and again, and collects enough cash to impress the local political boss. That outrageous sequence becomes the engine of his rise. The machine decides McGinty is useful, fearless, and willing to play dirty. Before long, he is pushed into public office, eventually climbing all the way to governor. The joke becomes more interesting when power changes him in the opposite direction everyone expects. Instead of becoming more corrupt, McGinty begins discovering a conscience. His arranged marriage also starts feeling real, and the man who entered politics for money begins wondering whether he could actually use his position to help people. Brian Donlevy keeps the character rough, stubborn, and believable. Nothing about McGinty suddenly becomes saintly. That is why the transformation works. The movie is funny, fast, and surprisingly sharp about political systems that reward obedience more than honesty. Its best trick is making corruption entertaining while still showing the damage underneath the joke. Number 17. The Devil and Daniel Webster, 1941. Long before supernatural bargains became familiar movie territory, this American fantasy turned ambition into something frightening. Jabez Stone is a struggling New Hampshire farmer who cannot seem to catch a break. Crops fail, money disappears, and every attempt to improve his life creates another problem. During a moment of anger, Jabez says he would give almost anything for success. A mysterious stranger named Mr. Scratch soon appears and offers exactly that. Suddenly, the farm prospers. Money arrives. Jabez becomes powerful while neighbors around him continue suffering. At first, it looks like the answer to every prayer. Then success begins changing the man who wanted it. Walter Houston makes Mr. Scratch unforgettable because he does not behave like a monster. He smiles, jokes, and seems more entertaining than threatening. Temptation becomes dangerous because it looks enjoyable. The most famous section comes near the end, when Daniel Webster argues for Jabez in a supernatural courtroom. The jury is stacked against him, and Mr. Scratch seems certain of victory. Webster cannot use magic, force, or tricks. He has only words. That courtroom scene gives the movie its emotional heart. The argument becomes less about one farmer and more about whether people should be permanently defined by their worst decisions. If you are already discovering movies you have never heard of, subscribe now and share this video with somebody who loves classic Hollywood. And tell us below, which forgotten film should have been far more famous? Number 16, The Seventh Victim, 1943. Most studio thrillers of the early 1940s wanted to explain their mysteries clearly. This one does almost the opposite. It drops the audience into a shadowy New York where every hallway seems to contain another unanswered question. Young Mary Gibson leaves boarding school after learning that her older sister Jacqueline has disappeared. Because Jacqueline has been paying Mary's tuition, the absence immediately feels serious. Mary travels to the city and begins searching for clues. Jacqueline has abandoned her business. People who claim to know her behave strangely. Locked rooms contain disturbing signs. Eventually, Mary learns that her sister has become connected to a secret group operating beneath the respectable surface of city life. One of the movie's most memorable scenes places Mary in a shower while a mysterious visitor questions her from the other side of the curtain. We only see the woman's silhouette. Almost nothing happens physically, yet the moment is tense because Mary suddenly feels completely trapped. Jacqueline herself is even stranger than the mystery surrounding her. When she finally appears, she does not act like a conventional victim waiting to be rescued. She seems exhausted, distant, and disconnected from ordinary life. That sadness gives the film its unusual power. It is not simply about finding a missing woman. It is about loneliness, fear, and the terrifying possibility that someone may stop wanting to be found. Number 15, The Uninvited, 1944. Buying a beautiful mansion overlooking the sea for an unbelievably low price sounds wonderful until you ask why nobody else wants it. Rick Fitzgerald and his sister Pamela discover Windward House while vacationing along the Cornish coast. The abandoned property sits above the cliffs, surrounded by beauty, isolation, and just enough mystery to make the bargain suspicious. They purchase it anyway. Soon unexplained sounds begin drifting through the house at night. Certain rooms become strangely cold. A feeling of sadness seems attached to the building, especially around the staircase and old studio. Then there is Stella Meredith, a young woman whose family history is tied directly to the property. Her mother once lived there, and Stella feels a connection to Windward House that goes beyond simple memory. One of the movie's most famous moments revolves around the piano, where Rick plays the melody later known as Stella by Starlight. The scene feels romantic, but the house's supernatural presence keeps the mood from becoming comfortable. Director Lewis Allen uses candlelight, staircases, open doors, and empty rooms beautifully. The house begins feeling like another character. By the final act, the ghost story becomes a family mystery involving competing memories of the past. Modern haunted house films use this formula constantly: attractive property, buried secret, vulnerable young woman, and a supernatural force connected to history. The Uninvited was doing it elegantly in 1944, and doing it without needing loud shocks every few minutes. Number 14, Hangover Square, 1945. George Harvey Bone should be living an impressive life. He is a talented composer in Edwardian London, respected enough to believe a major breakthrough may be close. But George has a terrifying problem. Certain sounds can trigger strange episodes in which he loses awareness of his surroundings. When he returns to normal, pieces of time are missing. He knows something is wrong, but he cannot fully understand what happens during those gaps. After meeting ambitious singer Netta Longden, George begins neglecting the serious concerto that could define his life. He writes popular songs for her, and chases affection she offers only when convenient. Netta encourages him while he is useful, then turns towards someone apparently more attractive. Laird Crager gives George enormous sadness. He never feels like a simple, threatening figure. He feels like a man watching himself fall apart. Music becomes the film's most powerful weapon. What should be the source of George's identity turns into something linked with instability, obsession, and destruction. The unforgettable climax places him at a piano, while disaster surrounds the concert hall. Flames spread, people flee, and George continues playing his concerto as though finishing the music matters more than survival. Bernard Herrmann's score makes that final sequence magnificent. The movie is part psychological thriller, part period drama, and part tragedy about an artist who cannot separate creation from self-destruction. It deserves to be remembered for far more than its darkness. Number 13, The Spiral Staircase, 1946. A giant old mansion, a violent thunderstorm, and a young woman unable to call for help give Robert Siodmak almost everything he needs for suspense. Helen is a young woman who cannot speak after experiencing childhood trauma. She works in an isolated mansion belonging to the wealthy Warren family, while reports spread about a mysterious attacker targeting women considered especially vulnerable. Most of the movie unfolds inside the house as the weather becomes worse. Servants move through dark corridors. Family members behave suspiciously. Doors are locked. Someone seems to know much more than they are saying. One of the film's strongest visual ideas shows Helen from the attacker's point of view. For a moment, the audience is forced to see her through a distorted eye, turning an ordinary hallway into something menacing. Siodmak understands that waiting can be more frightening than action. A door opens slowly. A shadow moves. Someone disappears upstairs. Nothing happens for several seconds, and those seconds become the scene. The staircase itself becomes a perfect suspense device because movement between floors always creates exposure. Dorothy McGuire gives Helen vulnerability without making her passive. She keeps thinking, reacting, and trying to survive even when the house seems designed to trap her. By the climax, the mystery finally reveals its face, yet what remains most memorable is the atmosphere: rain outside, darkness inside, and the feeling that danger could be standing only one room away. Number 12, The Locket, 1946. Some films use flashbacks to clarify a mystery. This one uses them to make the mystery deeper. The story begins on Nancy's wedding day. Everything appears ready for a beautiful ceremony until psychiatrist Harry Blair arrives with a shocking warning for the groom. He insists that Nancy is not the woman everyone thinks she is. Then he begins telling his story. His memories take us backward into his own relationship with Nancy. Inside that story, another person tells another story about her. Suddenly, the audience is watching a flashback inside another flashback, trying to decide which version of Nancy is true. At the center is a childhood incident involving a valuable locket. Young Nancy is accused of stealing it, and the emotional damage caused by that accusation appears to shape everything that follows. Lorraine Day makes Nancy fascinating because she changes depending on who is remembering her. To one man, she is charming and wounded. To another, she is manipulative. To someone else, she remains almost impossible to understand. The cleverest part comes when the story finally returns to the wedding ceremony. We are looking at the same bride, the same room, and many of the same faces, but now every smile feels different. For a studio thriller from 1946, the narrative structure is surprisingly ambitious. Rather than giving audiences one clean explanation, it forces them to reconstruct a damaged life from competing perspectives. Number 11. The Red House, 1947. The fastest way to make young people curious is to tell them they must never go somewhere. Pete lives on an isolated farm with his sister Ellen and their adopted daughter Meg. When local teenager Nath begins helping around the property, everything seems peaceful until he mentions taking a shortcut through nearby Oxhead Woods. He warns Nath about screams, danger, and something hidden deep among the trees. Most importantly, he refuses to explain exactly what frightens him. Somewhere inside those woods stands an abandoned red house. Pete clearly knows what happened there, but every attempt to discuss it makes him more unstable. One of the strongest sequences follows Nath trying to cross the woods after dark. Branches move, distant noises echo, and Pete's warnings repeat in his imagination. The audience cannot tell whether a real threat is nearby or whether fear has turned the landscape itself into an enemy. Edward G. Robinson gives Pete enormous emotional weight. His anger initially seems irrational. Gradually, we understand that it is built on guilt and a secret he has spent years trying to bury. The rural setting adds an unusual American Gothic quality. Open fields feel peaceful by daylight and deeply threatening after sunset. By the time the truth is finally revealed, the movie has become less about supernatural fear than about what happens when one terrible memory controls an entire family. Number 10. Raw Deal, 1948. Joe Sullivan wants out of prison, and his girlfriend Pat is willing to risk everything to help him escape. Joe has unfinished business with criminal boss Rick Coyle, who owes him money. Coyle secretly expects Joe's escape to end badly before that debt can ever be collected. Then another woman becomes trapped in the situation. Anne Martin represents the respectable world Joe might have lived in under different circumstances. Once she becomes involved in the escape, she travels with Joe and Pat while police close in. Pat understands Joe's criminal past and has remained loyal to him. Anne believes there may still be enough decency inside him to choose another future. Director Anthony Mann and cinematographer John Alton make nearly every location feel dangerous. Rooms disappear into darkness. Faces are hidden behind smoke. Narrow streets and staircases look less like escape routes than traps. Claire Trevor's narration gives Pat's jealousy and fear unusual power. She senses Joe drifting emotionally toward Anne, even while she is the person who risked everything to free him. The fog-covered climax is especially memorable. Visibility disappears as Joe finally understands what Coyle planned from the beginning. At that point, survival is no longer the only question. He must decide what kind of man he wants to be before time runs out. Raw Deal has all the expected noir ingredients, but its sadness makes it something richer than another story about criminals running from the law. Number 9. Moonrise, 1948. Before Danny Hawkins gets any chance to define himself, his town has already decided what he is. His father was convicted and executed when Danny was a child, and that shame follows the boy everywhere. Other children mock him. Adults remember the family history. Danny grows up believing that something dangerous may be inside him simply because everyone keeps telling him so. The opening montage communicates years of humiliation with brutal efficiency. Rain falls, children torment him, shadows stretch across the screen. Childhood becomes one long memory Danny cannot escape. As an adult, he gets into a confrontation with Jerry Sykes, a man who has bullied him for years. The fight ends with Jerry dead. Instead of reporting what happened, he hides the truth because he is terrified the town will see the incident as proof that he was always destined to become like his father. His relationship with schoolteacher Gilly Johnson offers the possibility of being seen as an individual rather than as somebody's son. The problem is that Danny barely believes he deserves that chance. Dane Clark plays him with nervous anger instead of heroic confidence. He constantly looks like someone fighting himself. Director Frank Borzage transforms ordinary locations into psychological landscapes. A carnival feels threatening, a swamp becomes a hiding place. Neighbors become reminders of judgment. The real question is not whether Danny will be discovered. It is whether he can stop living according to an identity other people created for him. Number 8. Force of Evil, 1948. Joe Morse has convinced himself that corruption is simply another form of business, which makes him more dangerous than someone who knows he is doing wrong. Played by John Garfield, Joe is a successful New York lawyer working for powerful numbers racket operator Ben Tucker. Their plan is clever and ruthless. Thousands of small illegal gambling operations depend on people choosing numbers every day, and Tucker wants to manipulate the system so those smaller businesses collapse together. Joe helps create the legal and financial structure that will make the takeover possible. To him, this is progress, efficiency, and a chance to become richer. Unfortunately, one of the small operators is his older brother Leo. Leo runs a modest numbers bank and sees himself differently from Tucker. He understands the business is not respectable, but he still feels responsible for the ordinary workers around him. Joe tries to convince him to cooperate. Leo refuses. Director Abraham Polanski gives the dialogue a hard, almost poetic rhythm. Characters attack each other with words, while offices, telephones, elevators, bridges, and streets become pieces of one giant machine built around profit. The most haunting sequence comes near the end, when Joe descends stairway after stairway toward the river searching for Leo. The movement is simple, but visually it feels like a man walking downward through the consequences of his choices. The confident lawyer who thought he controlled the system now looks tiny inside it. What makes the movie feel modern is the idea that greed rarely announces itself as greed. Joe keeps renaming it opportunity, efficiency, and success until those words stop protecting him. Force of Evil is technically a crime drama, but underneath sits a much larger argument about money, family loyalty, power, and what happens when every human relationship becomes a transaction. Number 7. They Live by Night, 1948. Bowie and Keechie do not look like glamorous outlaws, and that is exactly why their story hurts. Bowie is a young escaped prisoner traveling with two older fugitives after breaking out of custody. He is inexperienced, nervous, and still convinced that maybe his life can somehow become normal. Then he meets Keechie, the quiet daughter of a service station owner who has spent most of her life far from excitement. Neither behaves like a movie star delivering perfect lines. They speak like two lonely people who suddenly realize someone else might understand them. For a while, they imagine escape. They travel together, hide in cheap cabins, and get married in a small roadside ceremony that feels romantic precisely because it is so fragile. Director Nicholas Ray makes that uncertainty visible immediately. An aerial shot follows the fugitives' car from above, making them look tiny against the landscape. They may believe they are free, but the camera suggests there is nowhere to disappear. Farley Granger gives Bowie youthful desperation, while Kathy O'Donnell makes Keechie quiet but emotionally strong. As the authorities close in, both begin understanding that their dream may have started too late. The final stretch becomes heartbreaking, because Bowie is no longer fighting for money or reputation. He is fighting for the possibility that Keechie might still have a life after him. Decades of lovers-on-the-run films followed, often adding glamour and spectacle. Nicholas Ray understood something sadder. Sometimes people run because they have never been given anywhere safe to stay. Number 6. Caught, 1949. Leonora Eames has been taught to want exactly what glamorous advertisements promise: money, beautiful clothes, social status, and a wealthy husband. Meeting millionaire Smith Ulrich appears to give her everything at once. Instead, it becomes the beginning of a trap. Ulrich, played with icy unpredictability by Robert Ryan, is enormously wealthy and deeply suspicious of everyone around him. He believes people approach him only because they want access to his money. They marry quickly, and she discovers that wealth does not create security inside Ulrich's world. It creates control. He decides where she goes, how she lives, and when she receives his attention. Even generosity feels like another reminder that everything belongs to him. Eventually, Leonora tries to build an independent life by taking an ordinary job in a medical office run by Dr. Larry Quinata. James Mason's Quinata is almost the opposite of Ulrich. He is busy, compassionate, financially modest, and more concerned with struggling patients than social status. Director Max Ophuls turns conversations into visual battles. His camera follows characters through large rooms and constantly shows who controls the space. The mansion never feels comfortable. The bigger it looks, the smaller Leonora seems. Robert Ryan makes Ulrich fascinating because unlimited money has not given him confidence. It has made him more paranoid. He tests people constantly because betrayal is what he expects. That turns the film into something more interesting than a story about escaping a difficult marriage. It becomes a criticism of the fantasy that money automatically produces happiness. Leonora gets almost everything she once thought she wanted, and discovers that she had been taught to desire the wrong things. For a film released in 1949, its ideas about wealth, status, power, and emotional control feel remarkably current. Number 5. The Reckless Moment, 1949. Lucia Harper is not a detective, criminal mastermind, or professional adventurer. She is a suburban mother trying to keep her family together, which makes everything that happens to her far more tense. Lucia's teenage daughter Bea has become involved with an older man named Ted Darby. Lucia immediately believes he is trouble and confronts him, demanding that he stay away. Later, Bea secretly meets Darby again. Their argument ends with Darby accidentally falling to his death, but Bea leaves without fully understanding what has happened. At that moment, she makes a desperate decision. Terrified that her daughter will be dragged into scandal, she moves the body and tries to hide the entire incident. The sequence works because Joan Bennett does not suddenly become fearless. Lucia looks frightened, practical, and completely unprepared, exactly as an ordinary person would. Martin Donnelly appears at the Harper home. He works for people who possess intimate letters Bea wrote to Darby, and they want money in exchange for silence. As he spends time around Lucia and sees the family she is trying to protect, his attitude changes. James Mason gives Donnelly quiet sadness. He understands the criminal world surrounding him, but he becomes increasingly uncomfortable bringing that world into Lucia's home. Their relationship never becomes a conventional romance. It grows through glances, small acts of protection, and the gradual realization that each understands something lonely about the other. Director Max Ophuls repeatedly places danger inside ordinary domestic spaces. Kitchens, staircases, breakfast tables, and family conversations become suspenseful because Lucia must hide enormous problems while continuing everyday life. The film's real suspense comes from watching two worlds collide: the respectable household Lucia protects and the criminal world Donnelly brings to the door. By the end, Donnelly must decide how much he is willing to sacrifice for someone he barely knew days earlier. Number 4. The Setup, 1949. Stoker Thompson still believes one good fight can change everything. At 35, Stoker is considered old by boxing standards. His career has become a string of small matches in cheap arenas where younger fighters see him as another obstacle on the way upward. His wife Julie is tired of watching. She does not simply fear that he will lose. She fears that every fight is taking another piece of him. What he does not know is that his manager has already accepted money from criminals who expect him to lose. The manager does not even bother telling Stoker about the arrangement because everyone assumes defeat will happen naturally. Once the fight begins, Stoker performs far better than expected. Round after round, he refuses to go down. His opponent becomes frustrated. The audience gets louder. The men who arrange the result become increasingly nervous. Instead of making boxing look glamorous, he repeatedly cuts to spectators. One person eats snacks. Another screams for harder punches. A blind man receives descriptions of the action from a companion and reacts with excitement. Robert Ryan's athletic background helps enormously. Stoker moves like someone who has spent years inside a ring. He looks tired before the fight starts, but something in him refuses surrender. The closer he gets to victory, the more dangerous victory becomes. By the final rounds, Stoker is not simply fighting the boxer standing opposite him. He is fighting everyone who has already decided his future: criminals, managers, age, and even Julie's belief that he should stop. When he finally discovers the arrangement, the movie becomes a question of dignity. Running only about 72 minutes and unfolding close to real time, the setup wastes almost nothing. Every scene pushes toward one man's decision about whether pride is worth the price. Number 3. The Small Back Room, 1949. When people think about Powell and Pressburger, they usually imagine extravagant color, ballet, fantasy, and giant romantic images. Sammy Rice is a brilliant British scientific expert working during the Second World War. His job is to analyze weapons and understand unfamiliar explosive devices. A serious injury has left him with a painful artificial foot, and the constant discomfort has made him bitter. He also relies increasingly on alcohol. His girlfriend Susan tries to support him, but Sammy repeatedly pushes her away. He feels useless, resents senior officials, hates depending on others, and most importantly, no longer trusts himself. The title partly refers to the scientists and technical experts working behind famous wartime operations. They are not glamorous heroes from posters. They sit in offices, laboratories, and cramped rooms trying to solve problems nobody else can. During one sequence, Sammy desperately wants another drink. A whiskey bottle appears to grow enormous until it dominates the room like a monster. The image feels almost impossible inside what initially looked like a realistic wartime drama, but it perfectly shows how much power the bottle has gained over him. A dangerous unexploded device has been discovered on a beach, and Sammy must examine it. His hands move carefully through sand around the unfamiliar mechanism. Every tiny decision carries enormous consequences. What makes the scene so powerful is everything we already know about Sammy. This is not simply an expert doing his job. It is a man whose confidence has been destroyed, trying to prove to himself that he can still be trusted. David Farrar plays Sammy without easy heroism. He is difficult, selfish at times, and deeply wounded. That imperfection makes the beach sequence much stronger. By the time he starts working on the device, success means more than survival. It means recovering a part of himself. Number 2. The Queen of Spades, 1949. The Queen of Spades looks like someone secretly gave a Gothic filmmaker unlimited access to shadows, candles, staircases, and madness. Herman Suverin is an army officer obsessed with the wealth and social position enjoyed by aristocrats around him. He is not completely poor, but he feels excluded from the world he believes he deserves. An elderly countess supposedly possesses a supernatural secret involving 3 playing cards. According to the legend, anyone who learns the correct cards can win enormous amounts of money. At first, he treats the story like information waiting to be uncovered. The countess lives with a young companion named Lizaveta. Herman begins sending Lizaveta romantic letters, but affection is not his true motive. He wants access to the house and believes she can take him closer to the countess. Corridors seem endless. Candles throw enormous shadows across walls. The old countess appears surrounded by objects from another century. Soon, Herman believes supernatural forces are communicating with him. He becomes certain that he finally knows the 3 winning cards. He sits at the table with absolute confidence. The first card works, then another succeeds. Each victory convinces him that fate has personally chosen him. What Herman believes will complete his triumph becomes the image that destroys him. Anton Walbrook carries the transformation brilliantly. Early in the story, Herman appears disciplined, controlled, and ambitious. By the final act, obsession has taken over his face and body. Director Thorold Dickinson fills the screen with visual exaggeration without making it ridiculous. Doors seem too tall, rooms feel too dark, footsteps echo longer than they should. The physical world appears to be joining Herman's madness. It does not need modern effects because atmosphere does the work. Number 1. I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. Quiet, poetic, mysterious, and deeply atmospheric, I Walked with a Zombie feels like a dream that becomes slightly more disturbing every minute. Betsy Connell is a Canadian nurse hired to travel to the Caribbean island of St. Sebastian. Her patient is Jessica Holland, wife of plantation owner Paul Holland. She walks. She follows simple instructions, yet she seems emotionally absent, as though the person who once occupied her body has disappeared. Betsy becomes determined to help Jessica, partly because she develops feelings for Paul and believes curing his wife may somehow ease the sadness surrounding the household. Paul's half-brother Wesley has his own connection to Jessica. Family tensions remain unresolved. Local Vodou traditions offer another interpretation of Jessica's condition. Producer Val Luton and director Jacques Tourneur refuse to tell the audience exactly how everything should be interpreted. Then comes the sequence that justifies the number 1 position by itself. Betsy decides to take Jessica to a Vodou ceremony. The 2 women leave the plantation and begin walking through moonlit sugarcane fields. Tall plants move in the wind. Strange objects mark the path. The sounds become increasingly unfamiliar. Betsy keeps walking while Jessica follows silently behind her. Eventually, they encounter Carrefour, a towering, motionless figure standing in the darkness. The scene understands something many modern horror films forget. Anticipation can be more powerful than constant action. By the time the women reach the ceremony, the audience feels as though it has crossed into another reality. A statue depicting an enslaved man pierced by arrows appears prominently, connecting the family's wealth with a painful past that cannot simply be erased. Frances D. plays Betsy without exaggeration, allowing us to discover the island through her uncertainty. Tom Conway gives Paul emotional distance, while James Ellison makes Wesley openly troubled. Yet even after the ending, the film refuses to explain every mystery. That ambiguity is exactly why it remains powerful. Most forgotten films disappear because they belong too strongly to their own era. How many of these forgotten 1940s masterpieces had you actually seen? Some were overshadowed by bigger stars, some were too strange for mainstream audiences, and others simply disappeared while Hollywood history kept celebrating the same famous classics. Great filmmaking does not stop being great because people forget the title. Tell us your favorite in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another classic movie fan.